Silent Hill F is the long-awaited return to original offerings from the Konami-born franchise, not counting the short message as that is more of an experimental experience rather than a brand new entry, so you can say it's been a while since we've seen a new significant Silent Hill game. With the release of the Resident Evil 2 remake in 2019, it seems like all the horror powerhouses were ready to step up their game and finally shake off that PS3/Xbox 360 era of misguided horror missteps.
Disgusting!
Konami now seeks to put the franchise back into the running for the king of survival horror. So now the question is, did they succeed? Well, the answer to that is a bit complicated, as the reception to this game has been met with a wide range of high praise and also some highly critical critique. What I want to do today is to simply give you my opinion on the many systems and features of the game. I'm not here to change your opinion or convince you of anything. I merely want to open a discussion and give you guys a platform to air your opinions and thoughts on the game. So if you're looking for a traditional review, you won't find it here. Also, before we continue, let me give you a quick breakdown of my experience with the franchise. The very first time I encountered Silent Hill was playing it at my brother's friend's house. I was about 6 years old, alone in the friend's room. I should definitely not be touching his PlayStation without him there, but I launched Silent Hill anyway. And I made it to this scene. Looking back at it now, it's incredibly tame by today's standards, but I remember being absolutely horrified by what I saw. And I immediately switched off the PlayStation and sought out the nearest adult without mentioning the horror I just witnessed. 24 years later, and I finally completed my first Silent Hill game in the Silent Hill 2 remake. At least the only one I can remember completing. You see, I know I played Silent Hill Homecoming and Downpour at some point, but for the life of me I cannot remember if I beat them. That brings us to F. I've beaten it a few times now on varying difficulties, but it's only still the second Silent Hill I've completed, or can remember completing. I've yet to play the core Silent Hill games, those being 1 to 4, which were all developed by Team Silent and many would argue the best in the series. As I've only played the ones that came after, I won't be making direct comparisons to what is arguably the lowest point in the series. I'm referring to Downpour and Homecoming, of course. Lastly, there will be light spoilers ahead. They'll be mostly out of context and I will try to keep any major story spoilers out of it, so if you want to play it, you can rest assured you won't see anything new. With that said, I want to ask you to please leave a like if you can, because that will really help my small channel grow. And with that, let's get into why I'm so conflicted with Silent Hill F. Now, I could just say the combat and call it a day, but that would be unfair to the game, as it deserves a more nuanced explanation than a simple combat shit, game sucks. Let's start off by breaking down the actual combat system. So for those who haven't played the game, its combat is a bit more complicated than simply swinging until the scary monster dies. For starters, there's a stamina bar that you have to regulate. Any action you perform in combat consumes stamina. Light attacks consume less stamina than heavy attacks. Dodging will also consume stamina, unless it's a perfect dodge, in which case the bar will refill itself. If this is sounding a bit like Dark Souls, you're not wrong. But getting back on track, when engaged in combat, enemies will sometimes flash, indicating an attack that is parryable. To do this, you need to hold the focus button, which will slow down said attack, allowing you to interrupt them with a heavy attack. Doing so will stun the enemy, allowing you to pile on damage for a swift kill. The structure of this combat loop ends up playing like a weird minigame that you're forced to engage with. In my opinion, it feels out of place in what is supposed to feel like an oppressive experience. Starting with the dodge that feels straight out of a Souls-like, complete with the iframes to boot, Hinako feels incredibly nimble, and before you bring up her track and field experience, I'ma stop you right there. I don't care what you say, that dash is superhuman. Couple this with the incredibly powerful and easily executable parry attack, now combat is empowering and feels more like a tedious chore than a daunting task. I should mention that at first combat can feel daunting and oppressive, but once you get the hang of it and understand how it functions mechanically, enemies stop feeling intimidating. That fact is further cemented when you reach the final act of the game and obtain the third weapon in the otherworld. I won't spoil what that is exactly in case you haven't played it, but if you have, You know the game almost shifts genre, turning into something akin to Devil May Cry. While I'm not a fan of how the combat plays out, I don't think it's a bad combat system. I just feel it's wildly at odds with the imposing horror atmosphere, and anytime I was forced to engage with enemies, I was taken out of that horror experience. Now, I kinda get why the combat system has to have an engaging loop. Without the parries and well-timed dodges, the gameplay could potentially feel monotonous, especially after a few playthroughs, which by the way is a requirement if you want to get any of the good endings. Though if you ask me, I would love to have seen what this game looks like without the dodge, focus bar and parries. Maybe add a block button that negates only a portion of the damage taken, and I think we could have a combat system that doesn't feel jarring and better fits the horror experience. Look, at the end of the day, I don't envy the developers. Coming up with a melee system for a modern horror game is always going to be a difficult task, because it's impossible to please everyone. Difficulty in horror requires a fine balance of perseverance through adversity. When that balance tips to the far extremes on each side, you risk killing the tension of the game. Either you make it too easy, in which case you no longer dread enemy encounters, or the balance is too hard and restarting encounters becomes frustrating. On the one hand, you're gonna have people like myself asking for a system that feels less empowering, deliberate and consequential, and on the other hand, you're going to see people asking for an evolution of the outdated melee combat system, one that possibly lends more agency to the player and forgoes any unpredictability that could be misconstrued as bullshit game design. There truly is no pleasing everyone when it comes to melee combat in horror specifically. So while I can offer a solution for the combat, I also understand that my ideal version of the game can vastly differ from yours. One last thing relating to combat, I'm not a fan of the way the game holds on a freeze frame whenever you strike an enemy. If this is to make the combat feel heavier and satisfying, then I don't understand why it has to hold for as long as it does, unless it was just a style choice. If you have any knowledge on why it plays like this, please let me know in the comments, because to me it just feels jarring and too much like an action game. Now, when it comes to my experience with F's difficulty, it's a bit of a roller coaster. For starters, and for those of you who don't know, when you start a new game, you're presented with a few choices regarding difficulty. The way it works is as follows. Combat difficulty and puzzle difficulty are separated, allowing you to tweak the level of challenge that suits you by setting them to either story or hard. Some of you already see the issue here. You see, over the years, we've been conditioned to believe that story difficulty implies a level of challenge that's easier than the baseline or normal. Basically, it's seen as a mode reserved for people who are only just getting into gaming or want an extremely easy experience. So when I was presented with only two options, I naturally gravitated towards hard, ignorant to the fact that story in this case is standard difficulty or normal. Only after my first playthrough would I come to realize this fact, because I typically avoid any media regarding the game I'm currently playing, or at least until I complete it once. The fact is, only after I had beaten the game the first time did I find out that the developers recommend you play it with combat set to story difficulty and puzzles set to hard, regardless of skill level. Call it misleading or hubris, but whatever it was, it definitely soured my first playthrough. Playing with combat set to hard was especially brutal. Now I can hear Captain Obvious in the background saying, "You asked for a hard challenge and you got one." Yes, that is true, but I usually play these types of games on one level above normal or recommended, as I find it better balanced for my tastes. I like a challenge in my game. The most boring thing for me is coasting through a game with little to no resistance, especially in a survival horror. I like it when there are consequences for screw-ups, and I like to be rewarded for skillful play. Reward can only be sweet if it is preceded by risk or hardship. But it seems to me that Silent Hill F was balanced with subsequent playthroughs in mind. Simply put, the game was not meant to be played on hard the first time round, and in my opinion should not have been an option from the start. Similar in the way difficulty was implemented in the recently released Chronos: The New Dawn, where there was one set difficulty for your initial playthrough, with New Game Plus being automatically set to hard. That first playthrough being one of the best balanced games I've ever played. Now you may think I'm bitching that the game is too hard, and that's partially correct, but let me tell you why I think it should be locked to story for the first playthrough. So if you were to play on hard from the get-go, the way I did, Enemies were more numerous, hit much harder, certain encounters were completely rearranged, enemies had their full range of attacks. Yes, you wouldn't see certain attacks until you played on hard. Also, your sanity meter behaves a bit differently. On hard, sanity no longer recovers at the shrine, and if you want to refill the bar, it costs you faith. Also, if you are using focus mode and are struck by a monster, you'll lose that sanity instantly. On top of all that is the fact that you'll be experiencing and learning the combat system and enemy movesets for the first time, and you'll be doing so under the most overwhelming circumstances, which doesn't make for a great first impression. It has to be said that any subsequent playthrough will be infinitely easier due to the nature of the combat system. What I mean is, once you understand all the enemy's attack patterns and understand what is expected of you when using your focus bar, that is, knowing when to press focus to get a parry, the monsters themselves stop presenting a challenge. For those reasons, I believe story difficulty is the way to play your initial run, as it allows you to familiarize yourself with the combat system, which can be the most grating aspect of the game. By the end of the first run, the thought of returning to the frustrating combat and encounters was off-putting enough for me to dismiss the second run. Though for the sake of the story and honestly this video, I forced myself to start a new game. This time I couldn't be bothered to play it on hard, as I opted for story difficulty for the combat. Needless to say, I had a more pleasant experience combat-wise, with puzzles pushed up to the Lost in the Fog difficulty, the third and final difficulty setting. I also unlocked the Lost in the Fog setting for combat, but I will not be caught dead playing this game on its hardest combat setting. Not that I couldn't do it, but I find absolutely no joy in the combat. The thing is, I love playing games on their hardest setting provided the gameplay is good. Just look at The Last of Us on Grounded, or God of War on Give Me God of War difficulties. Completing those took me many hours and many do-overs to beat, but they were so fun all the way through. I cannot say the same of this game. Combat is quite literally a means to an end in this case. And after beating it once, I find combat to be a rather joyless slog. Just something you get through so you can see the rest of the story. Honestly, it just plays too similar to a middling action game, and if I wanted fun and satisfying combat, I'd go play something else. While we're on the topic of difficulty, let's discuss the puzzles. So, puzzle-wise, my first playthrough was on hard, second was on Lost in the Fog, and third was story. Like I mentioned before, I tend to avoid looking up anything while I'm playing certain games, mainly because I'm paranoid about seeing major spoilers. It happened to me in the past with God of War Ragnarok, so for me, I try to be extra careful with that sort of thing now. Point is, I was forced to look up a certain puzzle that I was stuck on with no hope of passing it. If you're wondering which one that was, it's the puzzle box. Now, I know some of you know exactly why I struggled, and others that passed it easily will also agree that it's kinda bullshit. Do you know what Sakura is to me? It's this bitch from Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha, the hardest first fight in any Street Fighter game. Look, I'm kidding. I knew Sakura was some sort of flower or plant at least. I don't fucking know what one looks like. Later on, I would come to learn that it's the cherry blossom tree. Still don't know what one looks like up close though. Point is, how the hell am I supposed to pass this puzzle if I don't know what it is I'm looking for? Not everyone that plays this can easily point out a Sakura tree. If I put up 5 flowers and told you to pick out the agapanthus, do you know which one it is? I know because my teacher one day mentioned to the class that she loves these flowers. I doubt the majority of you would give 2 shits about an agapanthus. By the way, this is what it looks like. I know this is a bit ranty, but I feel like I have to make the point. Because on hard, there's so many possible wrong combinations, and unfortunately, you can't progress without solving it. Passing this puzzle requires a specific knowledge of Japanese flora, and it puzzles me how you could possibly solve this without first knowing what the flowers look like. Apart from the puzzle box, there was 1 or 2 points that had me scratching my head, only to find the solution was deliberately confusing. Overall, I kinda wish there was more puzzles that relied on logic more than convoluted riddles and knowledge on very specific things. Now, story was another mixed bag for me. Don't get me wrong, I love the story. In fact, Hinako's journey was the main driving force behind my multiple playthroughs of the game. Watching things unfold throughout that first playthrough was as intriguing as much as it was heartbreaking to behold. There's so many times throughout the story where you just want to reach through the screen and give Hinako a reassuring hug and tell it's going to be okay. Look, I don't want to spoil too much if you haven't played the game yet, but Silent Hill F covers difficult subject matters not often portrayed or discussed in video games, and I appreciate the effort they made in bringing up those matters that so many others are too afraid to touch. If you have even the slightest passing interest in the game, I recommend playing it for this reason alone. Silent Hill F goes to some wild places that I doubt you've seen before in a game, and it's worth playing to simply expand your worldview just a touch. Unfortunately, there is a but, and it's something I'm not too big on. By now you've probably heard the game has multiple endings, and regardless of how you feel about playing the game multiple times over, it's a huge ask of someone to play through it 4 times to see the true ending. Thankfully, the game itself becomes easier to beat each run due to all your upgrades carrying over, certain sections of the game also more streamlined, plus knowledge of your past runs helps speed things up along considerably. For those of you who are still interested in playing this game, be wary that the good ending is locked behind a few playthroughs. Though I gotta commend the devs for adding depth to subsequent playthroughs. So many times a game will boast New Game Plus, only to find out that it's just the same experience as the first run, this time with the added benefit of your unlocked weapons. But Silent Hill F goes above and beyond, adding things like extended cutscenes, new items and side quests, as well as opening new pathways and shuffling enemies' encounters to keep things fresh. The only problem being, you have to endure a gameplay loop that becomes quite monotonous after the first playthrough. Alright, before we wrap up, I want to rattle off a few things worth mentioning. Starting off with the setting and atmosphere. Silent Hill's depiction of 1960s Japan was absolutely incredible. Walking through this quaint village almost makes you envious of the people living there. What were their simple lives and simple yet elegant homes? Then you stumble upon this nightmare and that feeling immediately fades away. The soundtrack and sound design was also a knockout. Music was appropriately creepy and unsettling, same can be said of the enemy design and the inhuman sounds they make. One other thing I want to mention is that the voice acting for the English dub was a bit disappointing. Not that they did a bad job, they did a great job in fact, but they sound so American, which kinda pulled me out of the game.
You traitor! Sakuko, where are you off to? Don't usually see you around here.
A truck was blocking the road.
Chizuruya?
I just want to talk to someone.
I'll be there in a bit, okay?
My plan was to play the second playthrough in English, but after an hour in, I decided to switch back. Look, if I play a game that takes place in South Africa, I want to hear some South African accents. If a bunch of South African kids started speaking with American accents, it'd feel so out of place. One other small change that would have made my life a bit easier is when you go to start a new game, or New Game Plus specifically, they could have had an option on screen that read as New Game Plus. Instead, you have to go to Continue to start a New Game Plus run. I, like an idiot, just clicked on New Game for my second run, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to realize I was playing a brand new save of the first run again. In other words, I was playing the game from a fresh start. A simple option on screen that read as New Game Plus would have been so much better. Lastly, I want to clarify, I love this game, and if I didn't, I wouldn't be on my 4th playthrough now. After you get through the kinda rough learning curve of the combat system, especially if you played it on hard for the first playthrough, then you'll find a heart-wrenching story about a young girl in 60s Japan and how she struggles to deal and adapt to a rapidly changing life. Even if the combat system doesn't grip you, it's worth it just to see Hinako's journey through to its final conclusion. But that's going to be it for this one. I want to thank you if you made it this far. I know it went on a bit longer than I expected. There's just a lot to say about Silent Hill, and there's still a lot that I didn't cover. But if I could ask you a favor, for those of you who have played all the Silent Hill games, please tell me why this is not a Silent Hill game. Look, like I mentioned before, I haven't played the old ones, so I can't judge this for myself. But after playing part 2, or the remake, it seems to me Silent Hill F has the same vibe as Silent Hill 2. Because if you're talking strictly on the vibe of the game, it feels very Silent Hill. But if it's also the fact that it doesn't have a direct tie to the Silent Hill franchise, and that's an issue for you, let me know in the comments. I'd really love to know what's the story. But that's going to be it for this one. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.